The issue that has caused the biggest uproar, it seems like, is this issue about the proposal to have some taxpayer-funded subsidy for political parties and campaigns to reimburse them for election expenses. Am I getting that right, basically?
Yeah, you basically nailed it.
Yeah,
well
so that obviously it's getting a lot of pushback from the opposition and getting a lot of reaction. They have been doing other things as well, though, and I think this is important to think about and talk about as part of this bigger conversation. One of the other proposals that the committee has approved by the NDP majority is to put campaign spending limits in place, which is something that has been called for in Alberta for a very long time. We had an editorial today, the position of the Journal editorial board, which is basically a position that I stand behind right now, is that the campaign spending limits are a very good idea. I think that helps put some ceilings on things and means that the candidates, they've got some, it doesn't have to be a super restrictive limit, but they can't spend, the sky's the limit. Whoever raises the most money is automatically going to win because of TV buys or something like that. So I think if you're going to talk about any other changes to the election campaigns, you need that part in place. This other piece of it, this piece of having money come back to political parties based on if they achieve a certain vote threshold or that kind of thing, I know that other jurisdictions in Canada do this. I know that the federal government does this. I'm not saying that it is a bad idea for all eternity, but I think that right now it's a bad idea for Alberta.
There's two ways to look at this, right? The NDP has framed this as this is going to level the playing field. It's going to help the smaller political parties get a little bit more of a voice, a little bit more of a presence, right? If they get some money from the government to run their campaigns, they still have to get 10% of the vote in their riding to get the money. But I think it's also clear that this new system, if it does eventually get passed, it's an advantage to the NDP. They have gamed the system. For years that was gamed in favor of the PCs. They've gamed the system back in favor of the NDP because the campaign spending limit that they've put up, I think it's 70,000 and
70 to 80,000 in northern ridings.
That's right. There were not too many NDP campaigns in the last election that spent nearly that much. In fact, I can remember some campaigns that spent only $3,000 in Edmonton, right?
Yes.
It's rare to see an NDP MLA or an NDP candidate spend that much. But now, if they get 50% of their costs back, they can spend that much.
Yeah. Is this an area where we actually agree? Dave, this may have been something where we have similar positions. I don't know.
As far as the campaign spending goes, I'm not sure exactly that it's the best idea to bring in right now, and partly because, especially with all of the negative talk that the NDP have been getting this week related to the vote subsidies, I feel that it gets lumped in unfairly. A spending cap isn't a bad thing, but at the same time, the idea that in an election the incumbent bears some kind of advantage, especially as a government in the lead up to an election campaign can make all sorts of spending announcements that the opposition parties can't make, to then turn around and limit the opposition's capacity to spend money on campaigning and on advertising in a campaign would put the government at an advantage. So I don't know if it's the best idea that the NDP could come up with.
That was actually one of the arguments that was made by the opposition. They kind of said, well, if you're going to have a spending limit, that unfairly impacts the person who wants to challenge the incumbent. Mm-hmm. The NDP's argument for doing all of this is, of course, to even the playing field and make it possible for everybody to come in and have a good old crack at politics.
Yeah, and I think that if they are serious and adamant about pushing forward the idea of having a taxpayer fund to reimburse some of the portion of the cost, then you absolutely need those spending limits, because otherwise, if there's no limit on campaign spending, then there's no limit on the hit to the Treasury, and that, I think, would be a horrible mistake.